Welcome to Not for Pieters. I'm John Dougal. This channel is about living intentionally and about living your best life possible. And today's topic is how to make life's big decisions. With a big decision, you need to choose between options where the consequences will have significant long-term impact on yourself and on others. And this particular video builds upon another that I just recently made, titled Life's Big Decisions. And in that video we looked at the categories that constitute what will be the life's biggest decisions, and they'll come in basically between the ages of about 16 and 35. And the categories are family, the wrong thing to do, which is to make self-destructive choices, but those are big decisions. Then there's relationships. There's choices on self-improvement, education, relocation. Should I move off to some other area? And that's typically for a job. It can be for other reasons, maybe family, but it can be for a job. And then there's choices on career and finances. Well, the best choices are going to align with your highest, most pertinent values. That only makes sense. If you're making a choice that is contrary to what you value, that's a pretty clear sign it's a wrong choice. So you need to know and really understand what your values are. And I've created a video on that before as well. It's titled Your Psychological Values. And additionally, since your big decisions will involve others, you might as well look at the videos Intrinsic Man and the Intrinsic Woman. These videos look at the inherent nature of both men and women and can help you to make better choices. And I'll provide links to all these videos at the end of this video. Well, personally, all of my big choices, or I should say not all of them, but most of them, they're in the rearview mirror. And the guidance that I've put together for you today, I wished that I'd had when I was younger. I did a bit of research on this, and I pulled ideas from a lot of sources. If you've seen that last video on Life's Big Decisions, I utilized some great work by Adrian Camilleri, and he's here again. And he has several articles in Psychology Today in the 2021 timeframe. I also found some useful information from motivational speaker Tony Robbins, and I drew insights as from a gal that's in public health and social work named Michelle Maldenberg. And she also has several articles in Psychology Today, including one on how to make big decisions. And then lastly, I came across a website called Psych Central, and they have good information as well. So what I've got here today is sort of cherry picking what I thought were the best ideas out of all these sources and then combining them with my thoughts on core values. So let's go through it. Well, Tony Robbins' best input was to write things down. And that just makes complete sense, because if you can't jot things down, if you can't explain a decision process to somebody else, then you probably haven't thought it through. So I created a simple table to capture Tony's thoughts on writing it down. And for starters, your big decision will map to one of the big decision categories listed. And again, that's family, self-destruction, relationships, self-improvement, education, relocation, career, and finances. So if you've got a big decision, what does it map to? Well, you identify the category, and then you list the problem that your decision is trying to solve. Something's bugging you at the very least, and you should be able to write out what is it that I need to solve, what's the problem, and then list who's involved, because it's going to involve somebody else if it's truly a big decision. And then once you've got that, you've got a feel for what psychological needs are involved. Is it your survival? Is it connecting with others? Is it power, achieving, winning? Is it freedom, Does it involve a need for more fun? Well, once you understand your psychological needs, I've got that video on psychological values, and that'll help you map to say, well, what values is it that you have, your core values, and what's involved. And you can also then look at what are your options and list those, option 1, option 2, etc. So you've got your core values, you've got your options, and now you can look at issues and risks and pros and cons. And if you're not familiar with issues and risks, picture it this way. Picture you're in the kitchen and you got an egg and it's sitting right on the edge of the counter. Well, that's a risk because it could fall off the edge and hit the floor. Well, when it hits the floor, there's an issue you got to deal with. So that's the difference. So list your issues and risks and then the pros and cons of your options. All right, let's go through an example. The example on the screen is one that I had to choose many years ago, and it involves the family, relocation, and finances. So I've listed all 3 categories. The problem was I was living in Southern California, or I should say we were all living in Southern California, and I was laid off. And the cost of living there is really high, and the little money we had saved up, we'd burned through that really fast. The whole country was in a recession, and so finding a replacement job in Southern California was difficult. I could find work, but only at a substantial pay cut. So, who's involved? Well, that's the wife and the kids. And so then what were the core values associated with the options that I might need? Well, there's family provision. I got to bring home the bacon to keep everybody housed, clothed, and fed, if not thriving. And then I valued family unity. I wanted to keep everybody together. I didn't want to run off someplace on my own and just send checks home. And then family security. I didn't want to damage the finances, like accruing a whole lot of debt that we'd be enslaved to for years to come. Any new job, I was looking for job stability, because I didn't want to jump from one job to another just to get laid off again. And then lastly, it was sort of the connection ties, because we had friends in Southern California and we were tied in with a good local church. And if I relocated, then bye-bye that would go. All right. Option 1. Could take a notable pay cut, stay in Southern California, but the pay was inadequate to cover our costs, and there was a risk of accruing debt and possible bankruptcy if it drug on for quite some time before I could get a pay raise. Certainly wouldn't get a pay raise within a year. On the positive, the pros are that we could keep our friends and keep our church. On the cons, the likelihood was that risks would be realized. We'd accrue debt. I'd have to live partly off of credit cards because I wasn't making enough. And the risk would be that I wouldn't get a pay raise in short order, and perhaps the whole house of cards would just, cave in on us. All right, option 2. I had a good job offer in Kansas that would not be a pay cut from what I was making, and Kansas had a lower cost of living. So from a financial standpoint, boy, that was a win. There was an issue and a risk because we didn't know a soul in Kansas, so we'd have to find a new church and new friends. And maybe that wouldn't be so easy. There'd be cultural differences because Kansas is not Southern California. Not to disparage Kansas, but there's differences. And would that fit in, or would we stick out like a sore thumb and have everybody, kind of spurn us? Well, on the con side, that's obvious. We're losing touch with our friends in the church in Southern California. Okay, so that's the decision, and I'm not going to spill the beans of what we did because there's more to look at and more to ask. Well, after we got the table filled in, there's some additional considerations you could make. You've well identified what the problem is, what the options are, you know, the pros and cons and risks and so forth of each one. And you've checked that against your core values to see if there's any conflict there. Well, consider seeking some counsel. And now you're in a better spot to be able to communicate what's going on and what your options are. But remember that another person's opinion, you know, might not have the depth of insight and the depth of wisdom or the depth of care, you know, as your own. So weigh the counsel that you seek with what you think of the other person in regard to their decision-making ability and whether or not they have the ability to put themselves in your shoes. And then use your intuition. You know, intuition is like, it's like the processor that's working in the background all the time trying to sort things out. And it lets you know, without giving you the specifics, you know, what's the best direction. So consider that. But then once you've felt that kind of a urging for one choice over another, try to figure out the reasons behind it. Why is that choice better? You know, next, when decisions have to be made, it's better to seek change than to seek the status quo. The psychologists have studied this stuff, and change is usually the right path. And so keep that in mind. And then take the time it takes to make a good decision. Don't use the time to lollygag and to procrastinate, because decisions, big decisions, can be fearful, and there's an inclination for some people to just say, no, I'm just going to think about it and ponder and ponder and ponder. That's not a good choice. So take time, but don't waste time. And then one other thing to consider is that kind of like in the example that I gave you, sometimes there isn't really a best decision. You could look at it as to say, what's least worst? Instead of trying to say, well, I got to find a way to win in everything. And sometimes decisions are damage control. So consider a least worst as possibly being best. Okay, lastly, you can ask yourself a couple of questions. Be cognizant of fear as ruling your process choice. And if you're feeling fearful, is that fear rational, or is it just a panic, you know, that's associated with the weight of the decision and the importance of it and the implications on yourself and on others? And then lastly, let's say you made the choice, and what happens if it backfires? What are you going to do next? And can you cope with that? Well, that's the process in a nutshell. I think it's pretty solid. And here are some links to the other videos I mentioned. I think you'll find them useful as well. And in the future, I'm going to make a separate video that's just from a Christian standpoint on scriptural guidance on decision making. And this is kind of looking at the wisdom of the ages, and so you might find that useful as well. I think you will, at least I have. If you found value in this video, please consider giving it a like. It only takes a moment. And then please consider taking a link and then sending off an email to a friend or a text with the link and sharing it. Sharing and liking are very easy to do, and they help the channel to grow. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Cheers.